Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are and whenever you're watching. Welcome to INRIPALC's first international online networking event. This is the third day and the fifth session in the series. And there's just first a short introduction before I will proceed to the talk. So this session is recorded just until we get to the end of the talk. Any questions or any discussions afterwards will not be recorded. There are very few live participants to this particular talk today, so I think I'll skip the poll. But we need to talk briefly about the event Padlet and ways of being involved. So one of the purposes or one of the aims of this week's networking event is that we want to ask the membership some questions about what they think psychosocial adjustment and psychosocial rehabilitation is. And we have, to that end, we have created a Padlet tool. So if you go to the delegate pack on page 8, there's a link, and you can link up to this Padlet tool and see the questions and maybe provide some of your ideas and your comments, whatever you would like to write on this Padlet tool. On Thursday, we have a facilitated session. So that's tomorrow. We have a facilitated session where we will look at these questions and answers and see if we can come up with maybe some tentative definitions that we can work with and get to a point where this is the position of the INRIPALC, and this is our definition. This is how we view these topics. Ways of being involved. You might already be a member of the LinkedIn group. If you're not, take a look at the LinkedIn group and request membership, and we're happy to have you a part of INRIPALC. If you want to be more actively involved, there are a few different options. For instance, if you would like to join the Lived Experience group, you can contact my colleague Steph Killich. If you're more interested in being a member of the leadership board, or you want to get involved in some research collaborations, then please contact myself, or anything else, please feel free to contact me. Our email addresses are here on this slide, or you can contact us via LinkedIn. So just bear with me a second while I change to a different set of slides. There we are. So today's talk is by me. My name is Lis Hammond, and I was trained as a psychologist in the UK, but I work now as an independent researcher in Denmark. I will be talking about the integrative model of adjustment to chronic conditions, which is abbreviated to IMAC. So whenever I use the word IMAC, this is what I refer to, so the name of this model. So this is very much at the core of what we do in INRIPALC. So as I said, this week we are trying to define psychosocial adjustment and rehabilitation, and we're trying also to raise awareness. And this is my contribution. So if we look at psychosocial adjustment, first of all, sort of more generally, it's about people acquiring a long-term condition and or disability. They will often experience that their life changes, maybe to a greater or lesser extent, and whether they wish it or not. And as their life changes, so the person will also inevitably change. For instance, if any of you saw the identity talk on Monday with Charlotte Glindborg, she talked about this thing that the identity changes when you acquire a long-term condition. So psychosocial adjustment, in my view, is this change process. And it's either happening by itself or through a conscious effort to adjust and change relevant habits and attitudes. As you can see on the slide, for many people, it's a very challenging journey. What we find in the literature is that if the person adjusts their habits and their attitudes to allow good self-management of their condition, then their life typically changes positively, and they learn to live well with the constraints that their condition are imposing, and they manage to move on and hopefully have a fairly normal life in spite of their condition. However, for some people, they struggle to make these changes on their own, and they might even ignore or fight against the changes. And this typically sort of increases the challenges, and eventually it can lead to poor quality of life and maybe even negative identity changes and mental health problems. This is what we see in the literature. So the IMAC, psychologists quite like to have models in order to explain what happens psychologically or psychosocially with people. And IMAC is a description, or if you will, a blueprint of what does this process of change look like. Well, at least it's one version, it's one theory of what does this look like. So it's an in-depth understanding of the change process that happens in adjustment. We know a lot about what helps people adjust to long-term conditions, but actually all the things and all the methods that we have to help people, they're really just tools that we apply without knowing how the engine works, if you will. So, for instance, applying mindfulness training or pacing techniques or whatever, although they're very, very, very good methods that help a lot of people, it's a little bit equivalent to taking your car to the garage, say it won't start, and then the mechanic says, let's try and change the spark plugs because sometimes that works. I don't know why it works, but it works. And obviously, we need to understand how this process works in order to really develop good tools and methods to help people who struggle to adjust. It's important to understand that adjustment is a normal process. It happens to all of us all through our lives, but that process can sometimes stall if things get too challenging and too difficult. So when people do not adjust, if they do not adapt to living with a chronic condition, it's because this normal process has stalled. What IMAC then can help do is it can identify barriers to progress. It can identify what has caused this process to stall. So this is the model, and I'll run through it quite briefly. And this is the impressions that people sometimes have when they see the model the first time. Oh, that looks complicated, but actually it's not that bad. And my experience is when I have worked with people with long-term conditions, I work with people clinically, and we've gone through this model, they really, really like it because they can recognize themselves. So it's kind of the process of adjustment seen from the inside, if you will. So the model has 3 levels. it's important to say it's a biopsychosocial model. These are the principles that rehabilitation professionals always work with nowadays. It's recognized that we cannot just work biologically. It needs to be biopsychologically. So the whole model is biopsychosocial. The first part of the model is what's called the preconditioned personality. So that is who the person was and what they were thinking and their habits and their attitudes, etc., before they acquired the problem. And it's things like health beliefs, it's how they interact with other people, it's what they think of themselves, and it's all their habits. Within this part of the model, there is also critical incidents. This is what happens to move the person from who they were into this person with a long-term condition of one kind or another. But it's that journey. For some, it's a very short journey. It's, for instance, they have a road traffic accident, and then the next day they wake up and a lot of things have changed. Or for others, it's a gradual change, and the experiences along that, plus their personality, will have an impact on how they adjust to living with their long-term condition, how easy it is or how difficult it is. So the next level is the continuous process of adjustment post onset of the chronic condition. The research has sort of identified 5 different areas where people need to resolve some challenges. The first one is taking stock. It's the emotional reaction. It's sort of looking at, well, what now? What does this mean for me? What do I do now? And looking at motivation to change. The next one is learning what is this condition about? What do I need to do? What can I do? How do I do it? So it's learning the knowledge of it. It's learning the skills of self-management, but it's also learning new attitudes, because maybe some of the attitudes the person had before are not working in light of the new condition. So, for instance, in long-term pain, working hard for hours is not going to be very useful with long-term pain. So the person needs to learn to pace, and that can require an attitude change. The area of support, this is where the person meets the world out around them. So it's not just support, it could also be lack of support, but it could also be the environment. So it's health professionals around them, it's family, it's friends, it's work, all those things outside the person. Then there's the area of letting go. It's letting go of those maybe capacities one has lost. It's maybe letting go of future plans, but it's also letting go of those attitudes that are no longer working. And the last area is acceptance and integration, and this is where people gradually accept more and more in terms of what changes need to be done, but also integrating new habits and new attitudes. So in each of these areas, a person might stall if there are challenges that they've struggled to resolve. And then in the final area, this is sort of what happens in the here and now. The person is challenged in some way. For instance, again, in long-term pain, wanting to do something for the family and can no longer do it, then the person gets into this conflict of letting go of what they used to do, learning to do things in a new way. But what makes it really difficult is that it changes the relationships with the people around them, and especially their loved ones. And this can cause some emotions that will cause people to resist change, but actually that can actually make the problem worse. So how that works is that so the thoughts and attitudes and habits from the preconditioned personality and what happens critically in the critical incidents, that all has an impact on these areas of change, where you might have these barriers that play out down here. I'll show that in the next one. So barriers up here are sort of played out here as a conflict that needs to be resolved. And if it is resolved, it moves up, it helps acceptance. If it's not resolved, the problems just carry on. But if it's resolved, it helps to accept and integrate new habits. And that in turn can help these positive identity changes that we see. If the changes are not resolved, the conflicts are not resolved, then we see negative identity changes instead. So that was an awful lot in a very short space of time. I will just stop the recording, so and then I'll take if you have any questions.